This is The Jason Jones Show, powered by Mudhouse Media. Now, here's Jason Jones.
Aloha, everybody, and welcome to The Jason Jones Show. I am your host, Jason Jones, broadcasting from the west side of Oahu. Don't be jealous. Don't be envious. Okay, guys, if you are a troll or a doxer, if you work for a George Soros Foundation, the title of the show is a softball pitch for you. Snip it up, clip it up, and get it out there and cause mischief. I'm about to interview John Zmirak. John Zmirak is senior editor of The Stream. He's written or edited or co-authored over 10 books. 2 of those books with me, The Race to Save Our Century and The World is on Fire. Were we right or what? Were we right? Well, his new article, written for a scholarly journal and with a title for scholars. It's for the National Association of Scholars. It's in the show notes, and the title of the article is Intersectionalism, a Weaponized Parody of Christianity. And really, this is an article on victimism. John Zmirak writes an article on victimism, but for the show, he gives it the title, Is Anti-Racism the Ideology of Antichrist? There you have it. Snip that up, right? But you got to listen to what John says. John claims that anti-racism is a form of victimism, and victimism is the ideology of the Antichrist. And I agree with him. John you should listen to the Jason Jones Show every day, just hoping John Zmirak is on. So yeah, let's just get on with the show. Go into the show notes, read the article, listen to the show, or just listen to the show. And this episode has been brought to you by Movie to Movement, creating a culture of life, love, and beauty through the power of film. Go to movietomovement.com. Take a peek at our movies, including our new film, Divided Hearts of America. You will see it this year somehow, somewhere, if theaters are open, or you will give us $19 and watch it on some sort of streaming platform. But one way or the other, you're going to watch it this year. And by Movie to Movement's program, the Vulnerable People Project, that seeks to advance the interest of the vulnerable from the child in the womb to the Uyghur and Chinese-occupied East Turkestan. Go to our website, thegreatcampaign.org, and for a donation of $20 or more, you get a free copy of my book, The Race to Save Our Century, that I wrote with John Zmirak. Do more if you can. $20 is the cost of the book and the packaging. You know the whole deal. I say it every show. So let's get on with the show. John Zmirak, is anti-racism the ideology of the Antichrist? Aloha, John Zmirak. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jason. Good to be on in these really weird times.
No, they're really weird times, and you said some very controversial things that I read recently on the internet, and you have this wonderful article at the National Association of Scholars Journal, Intersectionalism, a Weaponized Parody of Christianity. You called anti-racism the ideology of the Antichrist. Did I get that right?
Yeah, you did.
Okay.
I want people to think about that.
Can I say it one more time?
All,
can I say it real slow so people can begin doxing and destroying you and virtue signaling against you on Twitter? John Zmirak said that anti-racism is the ideology of the Antichrist. So now all of you virtue signaling social justice warriors, get to work. And you don't have to listen to the rest of the show. It doesn't really matter what John has to say. Go for it. All right, John. Now we gave them their bone. What did you mean?
Okay. First of all, if we think about what the Antichrist is supposed to be in Scripture and in prophecy, it's supposed to be something that attracts people, that people can mistake for the genuine gospel, that just changes a few things here and there in the Christian DNA, just enough to vitiate and make meaningless the entirety of Christian faith, but not obvious enough that people will notice it. Remember, St. Paul says that the Antichrist will be so persuasive that if the time were not cut short, even the elect would be fooled and would fall for it. So with that in mind, the Antichrist is probably not, and I don't mean one, the final Antichrist, because there are many Antichrists throughout history. Hitler was effectively one for the German people. But if there's an Antichrist spirit abroad in the West today, it's not going to be someone like Osama bin Laden. It's not going to be some dumb skinhead like Richard Spencer and the white supremacist cranks worshiping their own race, because it's obvious that doesn't represent Christianity. It's blindingly obvious. Furthermore, these things aren't popular in the media. These things aren't gaining the fealty of billionaires running corporations. You're not going to see the media censoring criticism of white supremacist cranks. In fact, they'll be silencing those cranks themselves. No, for something to be the spirit of Antichrist, it has to fool bishops and cardinals and popes and ministers and Christian universities and Christian colleges, as well as being an ideology that is pleasing to Caesar, to the forces of this world, to the principalities and powers that dominate our culture. So keep that in mind, okay? The Antichrist is supposed to be the velvet glove over a steel fist. And what is more of a velvet glove today than joining in with the angry people in the streets, maybe pursing your lips a little bit as the rioters destroy black neighborhoods and ruin Hispanic-owned businesses and cause hundreds of millions of dollars in damage to people who've already been locked out of their jobs for months. But if you can position yourself with the forces of goodness and reform and purity and virtue, wow, you're a really good person. It doesn't really matter what you've done in your personal life because you're with the forces of progress. So Archbishop Wilton Gregory, the Archbishop of Washington, D.C., the de facto head of the Catholic Church in America, people are not going to look too closely at the fact that back in 2002, he colluded with the child molester Cardinal Theodore McCarrick to exempt bishops like McCarrick from any church penalties for raping children or for moving pedophile child rapists from state to state to hide them from the police. That was an official church policy that McCarrick and Gregory enacted together in 2002. Nobody's going to look at that because Wilton Gregory is condemning Donald Trump. Wilton Gregory is calling for social justice. He's ordering the priests of Washington, D.C. to march in an anti-Trump demonstration. He's claiming to be fighting the virus of racism. And if you look at the statements from the U.S. Council of Catholic Bishops for the last 20 years, they denounce racism, all right? And that's a good thing in itself, but they don't define racism in Christian moral terms. They define it in Marxist terms, purely Marxist terms, by which I mean they say only people whose group is in a position of power can be guilty of racism. So if you are an unemployed coal miner in West Virginia, but you're white, you can be guilty of racism. If you're one of Obama's daughters, coasting through life on a cushion of privilege and wealth, no, you can't be guilty of racism. You see how that works? It's really interesting. It takes away any personal moral responsibility. It takes away any conversion of the heart. It makes your actual relationships with people of other races, which could be friendly, which could be charitable, you could be married to one, they're all irrelevant. You are part of an impersonal social mechanism, and you're racist whether you want to be or not. And on the other hand, if you're black, you could be burning down synagogues. But you're not racist because by definition, you can't be. So, anti-racism defined this way has nothing to do with the civil rights movement, nothing to do with what Martin Luther King stood for, nothing to do with what the abolitionists favored, nothing to do with the gospel of Jesus Christ in which there is neither black nor white, Jew nor Greek, slave or free. It has nothing whatsoever to do with that. Anti-racism, as they have defined it, as the anti-racist organizations themselves, like Black Lives Matter, as they define it, It has nothing to do with personal bias against people based on their race. It has to do with whether you're part of a group that they have defined as privileged. And you could be poor, you could be unemployed, you could be a Vietnam veteran with post-traumatic stress disorder. It doesn't matter. If you're white, you're implicated. And if you're black, you're exonerated. That, Jason, is the ideology of the Antichrist today. It takes the trappings of Christianity. It takes Christian costume. It takes Christian sentiments. And it uses them to mask Marxist ideology. And if you think I'm kidding, look at the website for Black Lives Matter. They want to abolish the nuclear family and have children raised in common by, quote, the community, unquote. How does that have anything to do with the actual interests of African-American Christians, most of whom are hardworking, patriotic citizens who simply don't want to be hassled by the police?
Well, and by the way, a lot of what the African-American community has suffered from was for hundreds of years, their nuclear family was torn apart, was not protected. And now the Marxists, again, want to deny the nuclear family. They want to deny our belonging to a family.
And why do they want to do that? Because the nuclear family is an institution that pushes back against the central power of the government, of the state. And Marx didn't want anything standing between the central power of the dictatorship of the proletariat and individual citizens who could be, isolated atoms whirling around the nucleus of the state, to be manipulated and dominated, imprisoned, tortured, starved at will if it suited the purpose of the revolutionary goal. And when we see these people smashing statues, looting stores, beating up policemen, intimidating the owners of Black and Hispanic-owned businesses, these people are revolutionaries. And they want nothing to do with the Christianity that's animated the civil rights movement. They want nothing to do with the actual beliefs of African American, Hispanic, Asian American, poor white Americans. They want to purge all that. They're willing to use the churches as useful idiots, but they plan to shove all these things aside the way they did in Cuba, in Venezuela, in Cambodia. Country after country in our lifetime has been subjugated to this kind of Marxist dictatorship. When they say they want to abolish the police, they don't mean some anarcho-capitalist thing where people are defending their own private property. They want to abolish the police and replace it with revolutionary militia that are not constrained by things like laws and judges and juries and the presumption of innocence, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. This is something the left sweeps away the moment they take power, and they start having show trials based on political criteria, and pretty soon people are being punished for what ethnic group or what social group they belong to. We saw that in 1917. We saw that in 1789. We have absolutely no excuse for falling for this again. If we let these radicals take over our cities, we deserve what we get, because we've seen what they do. We've seen their rhetoric before. We've seen how they operate. If we let them take over, it's just because we are cowards.
Yeah, so is that it with people like Wilton Gregory? Are they cowards or are they leftist ideologues? Or are they just addled with such guilt at their personal sin and how unjust? It is not justice of any kind to shuttle child rapists from parish to parish. So are they addled with guilt that they look for opportunities to absolve themselves, not in the confessional?
It's a mixture, Jason. Some of these people just want to steal some flat screen TVs. Some of them want to smash the windows of stores where they could never afford to shop. Some of them are radical Marxist ideologues. And some of them are just disgusting opportunists like Wilton Gregory, who have a bad conscience because of their squalid moral lives and are looking to hide behind the dead body of poor George Floyd. Remember, one thing I said I think is important. I think a lot of this white guilt is real, but it's deflected. I think a lot of people have guilty consciences about the abortions they paid for, the abortions they had, the abortions they coerced women into having, the abortions they supported in the ghetto and Planned Parenthood. Within the back of their mind, they're thinking, oh, it'll keep down the welfare rolls. Maybe there won't be quite so many people in the inner city. We'll help keep the peace. So let's send more money to Planned Parenthood so they can cut up little black babies and sell their organs to be used in research so that rich white people can get organ transplants. There's a lot of
there's an undercover video for people who are recording that people think what you're saying is too much. It's absurd. There's an undercover recording of Planned Parenthood accepting a donation from someone who said they were racist and they wanted it to be used only for black mothers to kill black babies, and they gladly accepted. They gladly accepted the donation.
Of course, Planned Parenthood was founded by a racist eugenicist, Margaret Sanger, who worked closely with Nazi eugenicists. One of whom had run a concentration camp in Africa during World War I and killed thousands of African natives and experimented on them. Margaret Sanger was lined up with the worst racists of the 20th century. And then when, in fact, her close associate, Harry Laughlin, went to Germany to receive an award from a Nazi university because the Nazis based their forced sterilization program on the one that Planned Parenthood had successfully implemented in 13 American states, which forcibly sterilized people if they failed culturally biased IQ tests. And at least 60,000 Americans were either sterilized or, in some cases, castrated in order to produce fewer children from the unfit, in Margaret Sanger's own words. She referred to the children of the poor as human weeds. Human weeds.
I have a friend, John, I have a friend who now, she's a Harvard graduate in her 70s, was as a young child forcibly sterilized. She's black, for being a moron, for being an idiot,
wow,
for being dumb.
Wow.
They thought she had she was mentally retarded. She's a Harvard graduate now.
These people were not real scientists. They were pseudoscientists, grabbing on to whatever shreds of science they could find to support their own racist views. And they used Darwinism as a tool because they tried to use people's interest in the so-called science of evolution to claim that other races than the white one were missing links between apes and humans. There's a fantastic, heart-wrenching video from the Discovery Institute called Human Zoos, which shows you how Darwinists weaponized racism and racists weaponized Darwinism in producing the eugenics movement of the 20th century. So these people today who claim that they're fighting racism, but want Planned Parenthood to keep preying on black children in the ghettos, who want to continue Democrat policies that enshrine poverty and government dependency and crime in inner cities, these people are absolute hypocrites. They care as much for black lives as the Soviet commissars cared for the peasants in the Ukraine who they were starving to death. So given all the profound evil that the left is trying to shove onto our society using mob violence, given the fact that they're using anti-racism as the velvet glove for that iron fist, and you've got people kneeling in submission before these thugs in public squares. You've got National Guardsmen and policemen taking a knee in front of these crazy Marxist ideologues. It's absolutely terrifying, and it comes disguised as an angel of light, and that's why I call it today's Antichrist.
So I guess it's not as you know what? Having you on my podcast, I feel like a teacher who's lazy and just brings in a VHS tape to show because I didn't feel like working that day because you just go. We apologize for things that we didn't do. And there's a book I think,
and that gets us off the hook. Wait, that gets us off the hook for repenting for things we did do.
That's on my podcast. I had a black friend on. We talked. I said, let me apologize for some things I did when I was a young boy I'm not proud of. I'm not going to ever take a knee for something I didn't do. And there's a book that you had me read. I just want, because people who have not heard about Margaret Sanger before, it just seems too much. There's a book I think you had me read on a gentleman named Ota Benga, one of the saddest books I've ever read. Were you the one that recommended that book to me, John?
Yeah. Otabenga was a pygmy from southern Africa who was kidnapped and taken to America and exhibited in the Bronx Zoo in the orangutan cage to illustrate Darwin's theory of evolution. And the person who organized that was a good friend of Margaret Sanger. His name is Madison Grant. He was one of the founders of the Museum of Natural History in New York, and there's a caribou named after him. He was a conservationist. He wanted to save the caribou. He wasn't so concerned about saving the Africans, though.
Yeah, so this man, one of the most tragic stories recorded in human history. He is eventually freed because some black pastors protest to get him released. But being so devastated and broken by his experience, he eventually just commits suicide. This is the class that we are still living under. You know, there are still structures of racism in our society, but it's the neoliberals that are perpetuating those structures. And we're not allowed to talk about those, and we're not allowed to apologize for those.
Right. You know, the people who want to defund the police, to cut police funding, it's an exact progression. The richer people are, the less important they think it is to fund the police. Gee, I wonder why. Because they live in safe, gated neighborhoods. They have private security guards. The people who need the police are the people in the inner city. And what they certainly don't need are the Marxist thugs of Black Lives Matter or Antifa taking over their neighborhoods. There's a section of Portland now has been taken over by armed thugs of Antifa. The police have seceded from the Union. This is a little Soviet socialist republic has just created itself that the police will not go into to liquidate, to dissolve and restore to the American laws and American justice. We are facing a very dangerous situation that reminds me of St. Petersburg in 1917 or Paris in 1789. And I recommend everyone take his Second Amendment rights very, very seriously.
Or the culture of
it might happen that you have to protect your own home and family.
I mean, this is the Cultural Revolution in China, where they're making people apologize for things they had nothing to do with. I have to confess, as someone who is a student of the French Revolution, the Cultural Revolution, I'm a bit intrigued to see all these forces and how they work and how they impact people I know and love up close and personal. Have you had that experience where René Girard talks about the mimetic contagion? He says everyone has the same response when it happens in their community. I thought we were different. And I have the same thought.
American exceptionalism. We may be hitting the end of American exceptionalism, where America goes the way of every other damned country that destroys itself at the moment of crisis. We have to see. We have to pray that God grants us the unearned, entirely unmerited grace to dodge this bullet too.
All right, John, I know you're on a crunch today. I only have you for a couple more minutes. What is the solution? What is the antidote to victimism?
Christianity. Genuine Christianity, where you repent your own sins and you pray for each other and you help each other and you have a genuinely colorblind view of the world. You view people under one of two categories. They're Christians, or they're people you hope you can win over to be Christians. Those are the two colors we should see people in, baptized or not baptized. And if they're not baptized, we should be striving to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ to them so that they get baptized. Those are the two categories that matter. Everything else is nonsense or straight from the pit of hell.
So, and that basically what you're saying is the Christian worldview is we see everyone as those we serve or those who we serve others with. So our fellow Christians are people who we serve others with. And the unbaptized are people we serve in sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. And the Antichrist worldview sees scapegoats, sees enemies, sees allies. Right. They're very fond of this word allies. It's quite frightening. I am just so grateful that I've spent 2 decades reading about genocide and democide and a decade reading everything René Girard read, because it did kind of prepare me for this idea that there will maybe come a day I just get stoned to death. I've thought about that for 2 decades. And
the thing is, it's really easy to denounce the Antichrist of the past. Everybody's against Hitler. Well, yeah, so am I. Okay, great. That takes a ton of courage. Who is the Antichrist now? What are the threats to human freedom and human dignity now? What are the threats to the gospel today? Inside the church, maybe at the very top of the church, dominating your community. Have you spoken to Timothy Gordon, a great Catholic author who was fired from his job teaching at a Catholic high school in California because he criticized Black Lives Matter on Twitter?
Yeah, you know what? Even if he criticized the Girl Scouts of America or the NFL, he shouldn't lose his job. I mean, this is bizarre.
Right.
It's
But to criticize a Marxist cult that wants to destroy the family, you can't criticize that because the sickening cowards in charge of your so-called Catholic school will throw you under the bus so fast that you won't believe it, and then they'll back the bus over you to make sure you're dead.
Well, it's those who love and those who don't really love. You have the mainstream media that they literally boycotted at a press conference because their chairs were 5 feet apart instead of 6 feet apart because they really loved their own life. They valued their own health, but they lack. I don't believe that these young people on the streets of America are putting themselves in any jeopardy with COVID. They're young and healthy. But the mainstream media clearly believes that there is a threat, a mortal threat to the lives of countless thousands of young people who are marching in the streets, but they will not tell them to not do it. They won't because they do not love them. So they won't go to a press conference where they have to sit 5 feet apart instead of 6. But if
they're encouraging thousands of other people to loot stores and breathe on each other and presumably get this disease, which is so deadly that 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, people who marched on the Michigan State House they were called grandma killers. The same people who call citizens grandma killers for having an anti-lockdown demonstration, these are the same people who put COVID patients in nursing homes in blue states across the country, killing off thousands of them. And, Jason, we're at a level of madness where rational arguments and facts get thrown aside. This is the level of ideological hysteria that we read about in accounts of Paris in 1793, and we shake our heads. How is that possible? How can people possibly go that crazy? Well, we're seeing it happen here, and it comes, I think, fundamentally from a lack of courage. We want to feed our neighbors to the crocodiles in the hope that we get eaten last. You know what? I'd rather be eaten first. My goal is, if this is a violent, radical revolution that takes over this country, I want to be one of the people they consider so dangerous they shoot me first. I don't want to end up in starving in some re-education camp.
Hey, John,
I want to make it clear I can't be re-educated.
Hey, John, I have really, really good news for you.
What?
You will be among the first shoved into the concentration camp.
Oh, no. They're not going to. No, I'm not going down peacefully. I'm taking some of them with me.
so I teach my children. I thought this was something that I would want my children to transmit to their children, their children's children. And someday, in some distant future, some posterity of mine would have to make this decision. And I never thought it might be me and my children. But what I teach my children is there's going to come a day where the Jones family, maybe it's your grandkids, maybe it's your great-grandkids. Now, I think it might be their father and them. But I tell them there's going to come a day where you have to make the decision. Are you going to save your own skin and side with evil and live on the outside of a concentration camp? Or are you going to stand with the vulnerable that's being scapegoated and die on the inside of the concentration camp? And I pray,
the question we have to ask ourselves.
I pray to God for invincible grace that whoever descends from me has the courage to die inside a camp than live on the outside of a camp. But that might be the decision.
I got to run to another show.
All right, John.
I got to go do another show.
Thanks for making time for me.
Okay, thank you. Have a great night.
All right, stream.org. John Zmirak, co-author with me of my book, The Race to Save Our Century. If you go to thegreatcampaign.org for a donation of $20 or more, you get a free copy of that book. But folks, when I read John's article, anti-racism is the ideology of the Antichrist, I know he's going to get kicked in the face with that. They're not going to read it. They're not going to read it. They are not interested in the substance of the argument because scapegoaters do not want, they want ambiguity. Because clarity, as my one friend says, clarity destroys controversy. They do not want clarity. The scapegoater does not want you to know that their victim is innocent. So they will never represent what you say thoughtfully. They will never represent what you say accurately. They're always looking for a way to misrepresent what you say that's plausible, where they can't be obviously called dishonest, so that they can have people join them in throwing rocks at your head. And a perfect example is Candace Owens. Now, Candace Owens is somebody who, when she talks, they look to misrepresent her. Candace Owens must be destroyed. Candace Owens must be discredited. Candace Owens must not be allowed to talk. That's just a fact. And even if I don't agree with everything everyone says, and I don't agree with everything, the way everyone says everything, I don't even like the way I say many things. It just comes out. So what? I don't dox people. I don't destroy people. And a simple rule I had in life is, I will stand with the vulnerable when they're vulnerable. If I have friends who are doing well, those are the friends I don't call. Friends who are, life is just chugging along fine. I have a lot of friends just in my own life. I want to stand with the vulnerable. My friends going through chemotherapy, my friends going through divorce. These are virtues that we all need to develop. And when you see the whole world doxing or attacking someone on social media, even if you don't agree with what that person said, do they need you piling on? No. Are you teaching them something? No. What you're doing is you are telling the mob, don't throw rocks at me. I am with you. That's what victimism is. Most people who engage in victimism are not pure evil. They are fearful. They want the mob to know, I'm with you. In fact, there's this funny video of these white guys literally playing beer pong. You can tell by the way that they have all these cups. They're getting drunk, playing beer pong, and they're yelling out at the protesters at Antifa and BLM and whoever's out on the street. They're like cheering in support for them. And a brick gets hurled right through their window, knocks over their card table and their beer. And he goes, I'm with you. I'm an ally. I'm with you. A second brick comes. The guy had a good arm, good aim. Flying through the window, almost hits the guy. And he says to his friends, I don't understand. We're allies. Don't they know we're with them? Well, no, they didn't, brother. They did not know you were with them. So what I say is I'm always going to stand with the scapegoat. So if a brick's thrown on my head, I won't be confused. I'll recognize that to stand next to the scapegoat is to become indistinguishable to the mob from the scapegoat. And you will never, ever, ever in your life regret standing next to the vulnerable. But I can promise you, every time you stand with the strong against the weak, the majority against the minority, the mob against the individual, every time you do that, even if you have the most childish conscience, even if you have the most poorly formed conscience, you will regret it. It will haunt you. And by the way, that is the purpose and the goal of the sponsor of this organization, Movie to Movement, which brought you this show. It's to promote the interests of the vulnerable by promoting the truth of the human person through the power of film and through inspiring solidarity through those empathy-generating machines that are the major motion picture. And we do it in a more direct way. The Vulnerable People Project. Go to our website, thegreatcampaign.org. The Vulnerable People Project, we work to advance the interests of the vulnerable from the child in the womb, the Yazidi, the Nuba, the Dinka, the Chaldeans and Assyrians, the Christians in the Middle East, the Muslim, Uyghur, mostly Uyghur, in Chinese-occupied East Turkestan. And it has been such a privilege now for over a decade to work and to try to unite together vulnerable communities to make them strong together, to advance the interests of the vulnerable. And that is the whole purpose of this show, really. And everything that I do as an individual and everything we do as an organization. So thank you for listening to this podcast. And go to our websites. I've been rambling a long time, and you can tell I've already lost my voice. So until next time, it's the Jason Jones Show. Go to thegreatcampaign.org. Aloha.
This has been The Jason Jones Show, powered by Mudhouse Media.